All right, welcome. We are back, round two, with Brianna from Bambi Media. How you doing today?
I am doing well. I've already gone for my walk slash run slash, kind of making it as good as I can. And I'm feeling good this morning.
Where in the world are you? I know you're not here with me right now, unfortunately, but where in the world are you?
I'm in Brisbane, Australia, and it is hot at the moment. It's summer
You know,
here.
it's hot here too, which is weird. Yeah, it's actually like 85 degrees, which I don't know how you convert that to Celsius, but yeah, we're having like our first spring here in California, and I know you guys have the flip side. You're like winter is our summer and summer winter. You know, I always joke about I'm gonna buy a house in Sydney just so I can stay in summer forever. I can go back and forth between here and there.
Sydney's
So
beautiful too. We're not. I mean, it's an hour plane ride to Sydney from where I am, and the weather is so nice down there. Like Brisbane's quite good too, but Sydney has those fresh ocean breezes, and it is a beautiful place to be.
nice, nice, yeah. Australia is like the opposite version of the United States a little ways. And as far as like podcasting goes, I always kind of wonder, is podcasting big in Australia as it is here in the United States, like across the country wise?
It is, yeah. It actually took over the US as far as like percentage per population. Last year, it had I think it was 43%, or maybe it was more than that. Oh, don't quote me on those numbers. But
It's
it
okay.
had an uptake into the market that exceeded the American market, which was the first year that it had done that. And I was really excited because I've been working in this industry for so long. And for a long time, I was only working with US clients. And then I've transitioned over the years now to have a lot of Australians. So I can even see it in the work that I do. The queries that I get are a lot more coming from Aussies these days than they were back then.
Really? 10 years ago, when you're trying to work with an American podcasting company, how are you doing with the Skype or what were you using?
It was always only audio. So audio only, and they would just record in whatever, Pro Tools or GarageBand. It depends on how adept they were at using tools. And then they would just upload those things to me, just the raw audio via like a Google Drive. And then I would take it and then I would edit it. It was so clean and easy.
Yeah.
Because that's all you had. Like, that's all you were playing with. There
Well,
wasn't all the things there are now.
it works though. I think people even today can still use that same process. If they're doing any kind of editing for clients, they can have them drop it in a Dropbox or a Google Drive, get the files, and then go to town. The only thing I worry about is that how clean are those files that the clients drop off, because they could drop you off some garbage that
Yes.
I mean, what do you do in that situation? Do you tell them to go back and record it, or you say, hey, I'll do my best? What do you do?
So it depends on the client, depends on their budget, depends on their time constraints. I have definitely dealt with a lot of terrible audio in my time, and it's always a fun conversation. I think the thing is that when you start working with a client, you have to prep them beforehand to go, this is proper microphone technique. This is where you should be sitting, avoid cars and dogs and, all that sort of stuff. And if you set them up right and they have a microphone, then you can't really lose. But it's mostly when you're dealing with guests that
Yes.
don't know, what to do, or they don't have the equipment. And then you can deal with some horrendous stuff that you have to try and clean up. These days, it's much easier with AI tools. But back then I was using tricky like EQ effects and things in Pro Tools where I was trying to cut out and notch out all the sounds that were annoying, or I was using Isotope RX like denoise,
Oh,
all these
right.
sort
Yeah,
of
that's a good one.
plugins and things to try and get it, and you'd get it pretty good, but yeah, it was hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's why when I record, I also record shows for clients. I edit for a client, and I do all the recording myself. I don't let them touch it because I'm afraid they'll screw it up. And so I even bought them a microphone, because at first they were using those god awful like operator little headset things, you know?
God, I hate those things so
Yeah,
much.
they weren't even like the good they weren't even like the good broadcaster ones. They were like the ones for like $10 you buy to answer your phone on your computer kind of ones.
Oh God.
And so they were using those, and I was using AI tools and stuff. I still do to like clean it up, but did buy them a microphone. Here's an SM7B. Here's a Samsung QTU microphone, and I'll mail it to you. I mailed it to him, and he bought another one for his other co-host. And now they sound great, but even when they have a guest come on, they will do either the earbuds or they'll do the the earphone thing or whatever. And I will use AI tools to clean up that half of the call. But the way I do it is that I actually have them link up with Clean Feed, audio only, and it links into me. I save everything on my end. They don't have to press record or anything on their end. So as it comes in live, I tape it, and then when they're done, and I'll send it out when I'm ready. So I automatically have the files. I automatically go to work on it immediately. But it does take a lot more coordination, and especially if you're in Australia and you're dealing with like U.S. stuff and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of hard to pull that off. When it comes to like audio editing, what have your clients said they kind of request from you when it comes to audio editing side of things? Like, what are they expecting?
So they're expecting a cleanup a lot of the time. So to give you context, we have 60 clients globally. So we produce a lot of podcasts every week. And so I think over the years, having that many as well, you get really good at knowing what makes a very good conversation versus what makes a boring conversation. So they really trust us to go, especially if it's a guest episode where it's them asking questions to a person. They trust us to kind of take creative license a little bit and go, this part's boring. Like this question you asked, no good. This answer didn't really cut it.
Really?
To try and get it to a point where everyone comes off sounding amazing and sounding like they know what they're talking about, because they do. They just sometimes struggle to get the words out, or they don't know how to frame a question. So it depends on how far along the podcaster is as to how much help you need to give them. But a lot of them, they certainly always request and know that we will cut out anything like the ums and the ahs and all that boring stuff.
That's kind of like a basic. That's like a basic.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
almost like an obvious. But sometimes I like to leave that stuff in because it kind of gives a little bit of a more human feel to the conversation when you do that kind of stuff. So you're talking more like content editing versus just straight audio editing.
Yeah.
Like both.
And giving them feedback at the end. So like our editors here at Bamboo Media, so it's not just me, I've got editors and a team, especially for the clients who are on like bigger packages. We will obviously edit, listen through, do the creative editing, and then at the end, we give them feedback on how they did in that episode. So, was it a good conversation? Is the title they picked any good? Was it flowing well? Could they have asked better questions? Could they have framed things differently? To try and help them, like just get better every time, because every episode is a new opportunity to deliver something better.
Yeah. I mean, every episode, I always say try to make it better than the last one if possible. I mean, I know you have winners and losers as you go along, but you're always evolving, you're always growing, you're always learning. That's the thing. Try to be learning. Don't be stubborn thinking like you know it all when it comes to creating a good podcast, because you could learn new tricks and new things and you just get better at what you do. And I think that I love podcasting. I love audio side of podcasting. Now, you guys just do the audio only, or do you video, or do you both, or what do you do?
We do both. And again, it depends on the budget. So we've got like a different degree of packages that people can book. So like a chocolate package, and then they're all ice cream flavors all the way up.
Why is that? Are you like ice cream? Is that what it is?
I mean, I don't know. It just was fun. And we had these little cool illustrations that my illustrator created with logos. And I love the feel of it. It just makes you feel good. So yeah,
it does, doesn't it? I saw that. I noticed that on your website. I was like, that's super cool. That's super unique. I actually saw that. It doesn't look like a boring regular, price 1, 2, 3 tier basic thing. It's kind of a fun deal. I actually dig that. That's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
So, but you said you've been in podcasting for 10 years. Did you ever have your very own podcast? That how you got started?
I didn't have my own podcast until probably 2 years ago, maybe less time than that, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That whole time I was just editing everyone else's show.
But why? Why would you edit for somebody else if you didn't have your own?
Because I didn't need to. I think was the thing, is that I felt like I was consuming so much anyway. And I knew what I was doing. I did a degree, like I had an audio production degree, and like I understood it all to the point where I was just delivering for other people and not feeling like I needed to do something of my own. I also didn't know at the time what market I wanted to fill, like with my own show as well, which is something that is very important. Like I didn't want to just start a show because I was in podcasting. Like it had to make sense for me. So yeah, I did it eventually.
Yeah, me, I was just like listening to radio, and I was like, I wonder if I can do that. But I could do that. Let's give it a shot, with no like idea what I was doing, and like nothing, and like no real gear, and an old computer, and I mean, I swear, the first thing I did, I had an MP3 file, the first episode all done, and then I'm like trying to drag and drop that thing into iTunes,
Yeah.
bypassing the media host altogether.
Just like dragging it in before.
Like yeah. I thought it was just like YouTube,
Oh my God, yes.
because YouTube, that's how you do it. You drop a file into YouTube, and boom, there it is. See, I wasn't aware there were other podcast players. I only had an iPhone, and I only was aware of Apple iTunes. So I just assumed that an iPod, a podcast was only available on Apple. So that's why I went there thinking it was like that. And they said, you need a media host. I'm like, what the hell is a media host? What are you talking about? So then I like Google that and all this research and stuff. And I think a lot about podcasting is kind of learning how you do this stuff as you kind of go. And being that you've been on the other side of things, been on the creator side, like the editing side of things. So you get your own podcast going, you kind of know what things should sound like, how the flow should go, the conversations, questions, things like that. So I guess it kind of helps you out when you do jump into podcasting. You kind of know what you're doing a little better, I guess, so to speak, versus me when I jumped in, didn't know anything about nothing.
But that's kind of cool as well. I like the idea of having that naivety too, because it just means that you're unencumbered. You just start it and you just see what happens, and it doesn't matter, and you're not chasing anything in particular. You're just giving it a go. And I think especially for hobby podcasters, that's a big deal. Like that's the whole thing. That's why you do it. Go and have fun with it. Go and explore it. See if you like it. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and another thing that kind of trips me out as you're mentioning that is that I've heard some shows, especially here in 2020, the COVID shows, the COVID avalanche of shows, I guess, that some of those podcasters, I swear, said they never listened to a podcast before in their life, yet they're going to start a podcast. Like, I think you at least need to like listen to stuff, like at least be aware of what a podcast is before you jump into trying to create one. Just because everybody else is doing it and jump into it, I mean, what if you're a vegetarian and now you can open a barbecue restaurant? Because it's popular.
I feel like I disagree there, because we definitely had people come to us that they wanted to start a podcast, but they never listened to a podcast. And those were some of the most interesting ones, because
really
they didn't have preconceived notions as to what a podcast should be. And the whole medium is kind of like everyone can do whatever they want. There's no rules really. So it kind of made it, I mean, to a point, you sort of had to at some point go, okay, I get that you haven't listened to any, but you might need to now that you've been going for a while, so that you understand what I'm saying here. Like there comes a point where you really enter the market. But if you're starting one and you haven't listened to any, it's kind of fun in the same way.
Yeah, well, I think with me, for example, my first like experiences with audio, like even on the podcasting side, was like from radio and morning radio, and those morning radio, like morning zoo type of shows, the bells and whistles and the gags and all that stuff. And so I kind of came into podcasting thinking it had to be like that a little bit, but it doesn't have to be like that. So, but I think a lot of maybe new podcasters come in thinking it's just like radio. So they have that radio voice, and they have the whole bells and whistles and and all this kind of fluff and stuff, thinking it has to be like that. And I think some of them burn out really quickly. I mean, for many reasons. I mean, one could be not making any money with it, on day one, and which doesn't happen very often. And then of course, downloads are low and things like that. Have you had any clients come to you early on in their podcasting career and get kind of like frustrated that the thing isn't like taking off immediately?
I always try and frame it when we have our so we have like a conversation of how to get started consultation before we get going, before we do anything. And I always frame it there in that initial chat to go, this isn't going to be the big thing that's going to go really fast and, grow really fast. You're going to get all these things and you're going to get a heap of downloads. it's not going to be that thing. It's going to be like growing a social media channel where you have to, you know, plug at it, keep going, be consistent, and it will grow over time. And I try and give it like a bit of a timeline for them because they always ask that, like, well, how long do you think it's going to take? And, you know, that's like asking how long do you think I'm going to live? Like it's not really a conversation that you can have an answer to, but try and give them a little bit of a frame. And I can also kind of tell, depending on how active they are on other channels, as to how that show, like the podcast, will grow in relation to what else they have going on. So if they're really fresh and they've got nothing, like no socials, that's a very different conversation. It's a very different hike based on that. Whereas someone that has a bigger social media following or some other thing going on, big newsletter or whatever, they're going to grow in a different way.
Right. But I also did hear that there are some people that say are massive. Maybe they're a celebrity, who knows what. And they've got like 1 million followers on Instagram and whatever. And then they start their first podcast and they don't get the same million on the podcast, maybe a fraction of that, and they get mad. They're like, well, podcasting's stupid because obviously no one's listening. Have you seen those? That happen with anybody you've worked with?
That happens with pretty much everyone. You're not going to have, it's not like one for one, like at all. But you can see that the growth is, like the trajectory, if it's a good show and if it's good content and they have good ideas and all that, it grows quicker than the ones that start from like nothing. But just because you have a really big base somewhere, it doesn't mean that when you start a podcast, you're going to have a huge audience that's going to match what's happening on socials or your other things as well, because it's a completely different audience. The person that follows you on TikTok or Instagram or whatever is not the same person necessarily that's then going to listen to you on podcast platforms. Your super fans will, but not everyone will.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's really good to be aware of, because I've heard and I've seen people think like, well, I've got, 1 million followers here. I should have, at least half of that or maybe more or whatever. Follow me on my podcast and that sort of thing. So in your mind, in your travels, what do you think overall makes a good podcast?
Personality, I think,
really?
is probably one of the main things. And I think it's the thing that people kind of forget a little bit when they start a show, that they're trying to be a certain thing or they're trying to give certain information. The ones that go better are the ones that have more of the flavor of the person in it. So if you're having a conversation with someone, let's say it's an interview style podcast, you need to be presenting yourself in a way that the person listening gets a good sense of who you are from the conversation. Those ones go better than the ones that are, here's my tactics, here's my tips, here's my tools, here's my blah, but don't frame it or don't share anything about themselves in the podcast as well.
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of interview-only shows that have their list of questions, and they're pre-listed because on every episode, it's the same damn 10 questions they ask, and maybe they change the order around, but it's pretty much the same thing. And so you're like, I'm not hearing anything much about this person, about the host. I know nothing about the host. The interviews are kind of dry. They kind of feel like a job interview or something, kind of like that. But I don't know who wants to listen to that. I mean, hey, there's an audience for everything. I don't know. But I like to have a little more of a conversation with a narrative of hitting certain points and having, knowing who your audience is. That's probably a big one too. I think a lot of podcasters have no idea who their audience is or who they should even their audience be. Do you have that conversation with new podcasters? Like, who is this for?
Yes, 100%. I think that's question number 2.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like, firstly, who are you? And then secondly, who is this podcast actually for? And that can stump people. Because,
really?
Yeah, because they're like, I don't really know yet. I'm just going to maybe see, my business is this, because we work with a lot of founders of businesses growing their personal brands through podcasting. And so they often come like, I'll just see, and it's like, well, no, that's not really how to do it. Like, you need to have at least a couple of avatars. I hate the word avatar, but
Yeah, I know, me too. Yeah.
you need to have those people in mind, and you need to have a reason for doing the show. So what do you ultimately want to get out of it? Because yes, it's for the people. Yes, it's for giving information, but what are you trying to get from this? And a lot of the times it's, more business for themselves, or it's a product that they have, or they're trying to sell merchandise, or they're trying to get sponsors. Like, there's always something. It's not altruistic most of the time. It's just there is a reason. So if you know who it's for and then what your actual purpose is, like why you're delivering it, that makes the whole conversation and starting a podcast a lot easier, and getting content that you think is going to work as well.
Right, exactly. You got to know who you are, and you got to know who your podcast is for. And I think also like why you're doing it. Like if you're doing it to have fun, great. If you're doing it to sell your book, great. If you're doing it to sell whatever, great. As long as you have a reason why you're doing it, then I think everything else kind of falls into place. So I want to talk to you about marketing, because you're a big marketing company. Marketing a podcast is different than marketing, say, a YouTube channel or Instagram and things like that. So when people want to market a podcast, especially as an indie hobby podcaster side, who doesn't have like $1 million budget to do marketing, globally on an expensive level, where would you tell them to start, and any tips or tricks?
So the biggest thing here is to remember that not your whole audience is going to be on podcast platforms. So if you're trying to reach as many people as possible, then you need to meet those people where they are. And the best way to do that is repurpose. From a marketing perspective, there is no better way than repurposing your podcast. You don't have to have video to repurpose your podcast. It definitely helps. But you need to have ways where you can meet people where they are. So that can be having a email newsletter. That can be having a presence on one of the social platforms. That could be like LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn. That could be Medium. What you need to do, and what I suggest and what we do for our bigger clients, is taking that audio that you've done and then creating firstly 3 or 2 versions of your show notes. So you have a version of your show notes that is for podcast platforms, and that's like 3 paragraphs and some chapter markers and some links. And then you do a full article version of that podcast episode. You'll see me do that on LinkedIn every week. We do that. It's a big article. From that article, you can then post that on your website and on LinkedIn as an article and on Medium. Medium is a place where journalists go to find stories, and writers go to write, and writers go to read other stories as well. You've now got an audio, so someone that's engaging with you on audio, and then you're also reaching other people, because they probably aren't listening to podcasts, on other places. So like LinkedIn and Medium. And if there's a newsletter that you could start, then you can put a transcript, a link to your transcript. There was some statistics, like some research that was done on even just newsletters, where if you say you have a podcast and then you click, there's like a link on the newsletter that allows them to go and listen to it on Apple, listen to it on Spotify, or read the transcript. There was some massive amount of clicks that would go to the transcript more than the Apple or the Spotify, because what you have to remember there is a person's come to read your newsletter. The bias is read. They don't have time to listen. They want to click on the transcript and they want to get the information that way. So think about that, like from a marketing perspective, what can I do with my audio that's above audio, that's to reach more people in the space that they're actually in? Once they understand, once they've like engaged with you on the platform where they actually exist, then you're much more likely to convert them into actual listeners. Maybe you won't, but they will then follow you on that platform and enjoy the articles that you write. And it doesn't really matter if they're listening to you or not, because you're still reaching that person. So that's the first thing I would say about marketing there.
Nice. Yeah, I kind of follow that strategy. I take my podcast and break it into audio chunks, whether it's an article, LinkedIn, like you said, or whatever, and things like that, and just start putting it out in written content form or other places, newsletter, things like that. So I think people see things first before they listen. So if it's a written content, whether even if it's a graphic or something like that, they'll see it first before they press play on anything. And if it's in some kind of written text, they'll probably see that first too. So I think you see it before you listen. So that's something to really keep in mind. So as far as like getting an actual podcast to get more subscribers to the podcast, where do we go from there?
Then it's a matter of, again, meeting those people where they are. So if you're trying to increase your subscribers, your followers, your downloads, then it's one of those conversations which you've probably heard before is trying to get yourself on other people's shows and then showcasing your personality and showcasing what you do and, talking a little bit about your show, perhaps, if it comes up, because the person that's listening to a podcast is more likely to go and listen to another podcast because they already enjoy the medium. You have to sell yourself in your interview enough for someone to feel engaged enough to then go and listen to your content. I mean, I have a show, Pump Up Your Pod, which you could go and listen to. It's actually not the purpose of this conversation like here.
But it helps. It helps.
For me to even do that, But it's something to be aware of is that, and I think a lot of people make a mistake as well if you're having like an interview-based show where they try and get good guests, like really good high-level guests onto their show thinking that those guests are going to bring a lot of extra listeners to their show. But in fact, that doesn't really happen. I've seen that over a decade worth of doing that.
Why does it not happen? Why do people think it does happen?
Yeah, I think it doesn't happen because the person that's listening, okay, like for example, we have a client that had Gary Vee on their show. Okay, a huge guy, but it didn't transfer into a lot of extra listens. A little bump in that week, but not overall, not for the lifetime of the show. I think because what you've got to remember is, let's say Gary Vee is the example, is on so many shows, has such a big following of his own, produces all his own content. You could say that about almost anyone that's big. They are already doing all their things and they already are engaging with people on their own platforms. Why would a person that's following Gary Vee then go to a random show they've never heard about and then listen to that show going, oh man, yeah, cool. Like it actually doesn't really happen that way. It's the mistake.
And I don't think Gary Vee's not going to share that episode anyways.
No.
Why would he?
No. And and again, like that's fine. Having those people in your show shouldn't be on the basis of like trying to get more followers. That's a different. What you're trying to do there is actually open a conversation, open a network, open a door for yourself to get to know that person and potentially, communicate with them, work with them, whatever. That makes sense. But having them on your show to try and get subscribers doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Having everyday people, having people with other shows, community that's built around this kind of thing that we're doing right now is a lot more sustainable and better in the long term for the hobbyist to actually increase the subscriber count there. So try and be on as many shows as you can. I like to aim for with our clients that have this be part of their package as well, try and aim for like at least 30 in the year. It's not heaps. If you can do more, that's great.
Yeah,
but it's like
that all depends too. If you're in Australia like that, and you're trying to schedule people with New York City, it's probably a little trickier and things like that. So I get it.
Yeah,
it depends where you're located. I know if you're like maybe center country and you're available at night, maybe you can do either side fairly easily, things like that. So with my schedule, it's kind of tricky to even schedule interviews as it is.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of don't do a ton. But when it comes to interviews, I know a lot of shows are deathly afraid of doing solo content versus interviews. What are you clapping for? You think it's amazing?
I love solo content. It's my favorite.
Oh, well, there you go. That's what I do mostly. So I think from my perspective with solo content is that it's easier to do. I can do whatever I want. I can edit how I want. I can, do whatever I want because it's my thing. You don't have to rely on a guest or a co-host or time zones and questions and all kinds of. But I think people do fall into the interview everyone show because it's easy. It's just have a conversation, get the guests to say whatever they want to say, get the ball rolling, hit record, and sit back, relax, let them do the show.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's what happens. But I think my perspective here, I think that the audience prefers solo episodes. But what do you think?
Yeah, so again, we have a lot of clients that come to us that have had shows for quite a while, and they've been just interviewing people. And then pretty much the first thing I say is, where's your solo content? Like, I don't know who you are. I have no concept of who you are, what you deliver, like anything, because you're not giving me anything. And they're so scared. They're so scared to just be solo because it's all on them, and they think they're going to stuff up, and, you know, they do, and that's fine. Like, it's fine. That's why we edit. You know, we can clean up things if you repeat the same sentence a bunch of times. Like, it's so important and so much fun once you get used to solo content, because I feel like you're more connected. I certainly feel this way when I'm doing it. You feel more connected to your listener because it's just you and that person. And that makes it much more enjoyable because you feel like you're delivering conversation that's just for them. So solo content is something you absolutely should do. Now, the trap that people come into with solo content is then it becoming boring because they haven't done good research. They haven't really thought about what they're going to record that week. And then they're like, oh crap, Bambi Media needs something. Let's just record anything, you know, and just get it out there. Like, it's not just our clients, but this is a thing that people do everywhere. And so they record something that could be better, that if they'd done a little bit more prep, if it was just an extra 30 minutes or a day that they were thinking about it beforehand, then the content would be so much better. And then sometimes that's why you don't grow, because if you're just delivering solo content and you start to not really plan and you don't have a good content calendar and you don't really know what you need to be delivering, you can start to just repeat the same message over and over and package it in slightly different ways. That's the trap for solo content.
Maybe I'm in that trap right now. I don't know. Yeah. So, but I think too, like you're saying, don't be boring. Obviously, when you're trying to do a solo episode, it's probably tricky. And I know some solo episodes are way, way shorter than interview content, of course, typically. But I've seen some solos go pretty long too. So I have not, as a solo person doing a solo episode, I think the longest I've gone is maybe 45 minutes, maybe. That's pretty long for a solo, I think. Most solos are in the 10 to 20 minute range, 20 on the high end for the most part. But what do you tell somebody that's like, oh, I don't know if I can do a solo. Like, I don't know about it. I don't know. What do you tell them?
I always help them through that first bit where we then create 3 months worth of content that's solo. So you try and establish 5 pillars on things that you want to talk about. So, you know, let's say in your case, the pillars could be podcast marketing, podcast editing, podcast growth, you know, solo, like as in personal content, like life updates and all that sort of thing, and then well-being, maybe. Okay, so you've got 3 pillars that are about your core, like what it is that you are delivering in your solo content, and then you've got something that's more lifestyle because everyone likes to sticky beak, and then you've got well-being, which everyone wants to hear about, as far as what you're struggling with, what you're not struggling with, what your day-to-day looks like, what your practices are for keeping yourself healthy, okay? Let's just say that's it. Once you have 5 pillars, then think about, maybe use AI tools or whatever to help you pick 5 topics within that pillar and do that for everyone. So then you've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 episodes for your podcast. That's all solo content. And it's so much easier when you bucket them into pillars, because then you're more strategic and you're not feeling like, oh, I could talk about anything. Put them into pillars and then it makes it easier.
Wow. That's great. That's fantastic advice. I never thought of it like that. I'm usually like off the cuff. Like, this week we'll figure something out. Well, for me too, it's like something happens during the week. I'll try to that's an interesting story that I could
that's good to do too.
Weave into podcasting. Like, here's how I got ran over by a truck today, and it released our podcast.
Jeez.
No, but I'm saying, like, for example, though, like I'm saying like something like that. And one thing that I started doing on this podcast that I wasn't doing before at the beginning was I started doing a hook. And I didn't start doing a hook until recently. Well, not recently, probably like 100 episodes ago. But when I first started, I didn't do a hook. It's kind of like a cold open, or wasn't even open, or whatever. But now what I try to do now is I kind of learned this from the other podcast. When I started the other podcast, my experience with podcasting was more like radio, and then of course with like YouTube videos. And the YouTube videos I was watching back then were kind of like these car videos and these kind of funny videos, and these guys would like start off the episode with like a action shot or something about they could crash your car or something like that, and then it goes into their logo, and then it kind of warms up to the video. You're like, oh, what was that about? They kind of get you hooked. So I kind of thinking that the very first with the other show I did was that what if we took a clip from the middle of the episode and like moved it to the front? It could be any clip at all. And I started doing that for a while, but then I'm thinking like even with that little clip, it still doesn't really tell you what the episode's about. So then I started for this show. I didn't do either of that, and then eventually I started just doing cold opens. Doing like a hook open at the beginning. So after I record the episode, at the tail end of the episode, as I think, well, what was I thinking about the episode? What was the episode about? What would be a good hook? And then I'll record that part at the very end, then move that to the front, editing, flip flop, no big deal. It's very easy to do. And that's what I started doing, thinking that I think when people click on an episode, they should hear your voice. It should be the first thing they hear on the podcast episode, not an ad, not a drawn out intro.
Long intro, oh God.
Right.
Yeah.
Or some, I've heard these ones now, they're like these long music beds that run for a minute solid before you hear anything about anything. You're like, what is going on here?
Yeah, I know.
I'm checked out already.
Yeah.
So do you tell clients that, give them advice on how to hook a good podcast intro?
Yeah, I definitely. It used to be the case where an intro at the front with music and, them explaining what it was and, themselves and all that for like 30 seconds was something I recommended because it created good sonic branding. So you had a really good idea as to what show you were tuning into. But the problem is that people are so savvy with podcasts now. Everyone's so used to hearing these things at the front that it's just like fodder. That's no one's really listening to what that intro is saying anyway. So you may as well not have it. Definitely. And I like to also switch it up. So sometimes there'll be a hook. Sometimes there'll be, a voice at the beginning and then some music and then the actual episode. Sometimes they won't. Like just keep people on their toes a little bit more so that it doesn't feel like you have a format that you have to follow every time. If you switch things up, especially if it's solo, it just creates something that's a little bit more interesting and feels like a little bit more off the cuff. So I love the hook, but I don't use it every time as well.
Yeah. Well, I've done the music thing. I've done a lot of different varieties of different things, create my own little cool intro, things like that. It's always fun. It's always fun to get creative with audio and things of that sort of. And I love playing with different audio. That's the first thing I figured out how to do was play with audio and then just mix things around. And I use Audacity to this day. I love Audacity.
Oh, yeah.
And I know there's other tools, but I love Audacity. And the first thing I learned on Audacity was just how to mix audio, how to I can fade this one out. I can do this.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this. Check this cool stuff out. I can overlap different tracks, things that sound super simple today, but back then I'm sure, or even for new podcasters, they probably don't even know how to do that stuff because I do know some tools like the script. I don't know if you even can do that in the script.
Yeah, you can. You can.
You?
Yeah. We have a whole series. It's actually a DIY podcaster series. It's a completely free thing that shows you how to do all of that into script where you can do all your fades and your automation and put all those things in. And Descript is a tool that I used to avoid like the plague because it just was so buggy and it just wasn't there yet. And, me being like a bit of an audio snob, to be honest, like before that, because of my background, and I was like a touring musician for 10 years before I got into podcasting, and I have all this knowledge, that I was like, oh, I have to use Pro Tools, I have to use these fancy tools, right? And so I would poo-pah and be like, nah, these things can't be as good, because these tools are the ones that I use, and there's a lot of people like that think like that. And then when tools like Audacity and even Riverside came along, not Audacity, sorry, Descript came along, I was like, this can't compete with these things. They really can. Like, they couldn't to begin with, but now we use Descript for most of our client editing because of the tools that you can actually use within it. It's not just about the audio editing. You can do that. You can do video editing. You can get show notes. You can do a whole bunch of AI stuff in there. You can, like, there's so many things. And that tool Descript was created by musicians. So that, I love that. Audacity I also like because it's free. It's not complicated. You know, you can do the things you need to do simply. And it's just, that is a great tool. Same as GarageBand is a great tool.
Yeah. Those are great tools. And I think people, sometimes they get in, they're confused. Like, well, how do I, like me, when I started, I didn't know where to even tape the audio.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, I mean, regardless of editing the thing, how do I tape the thing in the first place, you know? And so that's like step one. But I think they said now, but there's so many, like even with Zoom or things, or even with Riverside, I guess, but Zoom and things like that, they have features where things can get recorded directly into their platform. So now you have the audio and the video kind of taped for you. And now once you have that, if you can get it onto your computer and you can move things around, maybe you can move the audio in Audacity or the video, whatever, and things, you can kind of play with stuff once you have all that. But I think some podcasters go video first because it's just an easier, I think it's an easier thing for most people because they have either their phone or they're used to doing Zoom chats and things like that. So they kind of go that direction, and then they take the audio and then they just throw it directly into Spotify or whatever as is, and with no editing. I think you need to do some editing. But it doesn't have to be NPR style. It doesn't have to be crazy like that, unless you really want to. But I think that's better than nothing, you know, and at least make it sound good. I mean, because audio goes, you say you like audio. I love audio too, but I think I like to have my podcast a little louder than normal, or what I've heard from other shows, just because when at work, it's noisy truck. I drive at work. It's kind of it's hard to hear and things like that. So I like to keep it at 16 LUFS for mono. But I mean, I know that some people seem like their podcast seems a lot lower than that, only because I have to crank it louder and things. And I know there are some apps, I think, that will automatically adjust. Have you heard about those? Some podcast apps that will adjust the audio. But that's only because the podcaster creating the podcast didn't create it right.
Yeah.
You know, that's why they made those tools, you know. So, but I like to have the audio loud and clear. I mean, it doesn't have to be pristine, but just listenable, I guess, in almost any environment. Like, no matter where the listener is listening to the show, whether it's on their laptop, their phone, their whatever, they can hear it clear on every single device that it could be played on. That's how I create the podcast. That's how I view audio editing for a podcast. That's my perspective.
I think it's important what you just said there. Editing is necessary, in my opinion, because, I will say that we have a podcast production editing company, but that's what sets you apart from all the people that don't do that. Because there are a lot of podcasts out there that are just, as you say, like maybe it's video first and then they just put the audio version on their podcast platforms. Sometimes that works, but after a while, I feel you're not really respecting the listener because they can't see. And so if you're saying something and you're showcasing something and
that's the worst.
That sort of
that's
stuff,
the worst.
and then it's on audio and that person feels like they're getting gypped a little bit. So I like to definitely go through, if it is video first, and pump up your pod, like the stuff that we create for Bambi Media is video first these days. It was audio and now it's video first. But with every episode, I'll do an audio edit of that episode. I'll go back with no video attached to it, so all I'm doing is listening to it and just make sure that it makes sense, that it works. And if it doesn't, I won't run it as audio. I will record something different that's still on the topic, that's just audio only. It's more work to do that, but then you're respecting the audio person because they're very different to the video person. The editing, I think, is key to keep it happy for everybody.
What makes a good audio edit, in your opinion?
Quality of audio is king. So, the microphone that you're using, the environment that you're working within, the way you speak, these are the things that are the first things that people subconsciously will get a handle on. So if you have good quality audio and you have a nice voice, like your tone is nice, and I like to say as well, if you smile when you talk, that if someone is hearing you and they can't see you, they will be able to tell that you're enjoying yourself just because you have that smile on your face.
Right, right.
That's actually a lot of it. That's kind of most of it to begin with, is that makes a good audio only. Make sure your audio quality is good, your location is good, and that you are smiling when you're talking. Unless the content is really, you're talking about grief or something.
Yeah,
and it doesn't make
a
sense.
true crime podcast or something.
Exactly. But that is key. And then from an editing perspective, once you have those things nailed, your job is much easier. Then it's just about, in that EQ phase, finding those little sparkly points in your EQ where you can really highlight those areas of someone's voice that make them stand out. And when you're talking about trucking as well, like if you're in trucks and you've got this, you're like this hum, this low kind of drone with the, like in a truck or in a car on a freeway or highway or whatever, that experience is annoying for people listening in trucks and in cars and those things as well. So getting your EQ right to know that you have to try and notch out some of those deeper, lower hums so that you push above the car noise as well. Those little things to me make a difference in the audio edit.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I like a good audio sound. As long as the podcast is recorded and it sounded great. And unfortunately, it's something that people miss, and they just assume that it's I can hear it I can hear it right now. Yeah, I can hear you, you can hear me. Yeah, it's done. I mean, what else is there? Like it's audio's audio, whatever, and they throw it up there, and then they expect it to go bonkers and go crazy. But I think good audio makes a big difference, and I think it doesn't have to take $1 million studio.
No.
People, I think that they think you have to have like those big giant mixer boards they have at the recording studio. You need one of those to make your podcast sound great. In fact, I mean, I'll sell the client that. Yeah, I use that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get a commission from that. Yeah, let's do it.
Right. That's why I charge so much, because I have to bring in the 80 channel mixing board.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't have to be that way. And like I said, when I first got started, I had an old 10-year-old computer and a USB microphone, and using Audacity for the first time.
Yeah, it's like a couple of $100.
Right, and I figured there's some free tools out there, and now with AI, there's lots of more free tools, but there are some tools that they cost a little bit. Some are free versions of things, but so many ways to make your audio sound great. So I think now in today's world, there's no excuse for bad audio. Like you even can take a phone interview, just a phone, and run it through some of these AI tools. Now it's like I said, like a microphone, but it sound pretty close.
Yeah,
sound better than just a phone call would. And so I think there's no excuse to get good audio, and I think that you respect your listener by having good audio. I mean, you should respect your listener. I mean, who doesn't do that? I'm sure some shows might not. I don't know, but
people get busy. Like they don't mean to not respect their listener. Like it's not something they're actively thinking, like stuff them. But it just happens. It's like it's a long list of things you have to do when you have a podcast, and so sometimes...
my list keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I think about my production, like when I first started doing this show, my production was literally like out the door in 20 minutes. Like boom, boom, bam, then we're done. And now that I've kind of advanced it, I've gotten like more in depth with show notes and more in depth with like chapter markers. I'd never used chapter markers before. Now I use chapter markers now, and I think that's a great tool, especially for like a long podcast with many different points of topic. To have chapter markers, I hate it when they don't. I'm like, oh my gosh, guys, get with it. And so it's not that hard to do, really. But things like that, I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. So everything kind of has evolved to where I'm at now, and I think that adding these little things, it does add time to your production. So for me to create this episode, it does take much longer than it did in past episodes. I mean, I literally get the whole episode out. Like this episode right here, I would have this whole thing done by the time I left to work in a couple minutes. Like boom, boom, done, out the door. And now it takes me a lot longer. But I also respect the listener, and I do know that I want to make sure I make the best thing I can for them. and deliver the best value I can for the audience. And that's what this show is all about. It's delivering the amazing value and content I can for the indie hobby podcaster.
And the one thing I'll say on that is when you're creating your show and let's say it's your solo content, make sure that, like, this is kind of a little hack that people don't do enough, is instead of addressing an audience or say like, welcome back to the show, they, or like putting it in plural, talk to a person specifically, because you've got to remember that that person is probably listening to that show by themselves. And so if you can, in your solo content, this is where your personality kind of comes in. If you can start or reference at some point through your solo content, like, hey, how are you doing today? Like, I hope that you're having a good morning, or I hope, if you're out on your walk, what are you seeing right now? Something that makes them feel like you're talking directly to them will make your solo content hit a lot harder and make a bigger impact.
I love
there
that.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Nobody says, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the show.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nobody
and lots
does
of
that.
people
Yeah.
do that. Lots of people do
Really?
reference. Yeah. They reference like the masses because they're thinking about all the people that listen to their show instead of the individual that's listening in that moment.
That's great advice. That's amazing. Well, Brianna, that's so amazing having you on the show today, and I appreciate you stopping by. And Bambi Media is amazing. Once again, can you tell everybody where they can find out about you and your company and all your amazing stuff?
Yeah, you can go to bambimedia.com. That's Bambi with a Y, so that we don't get sued by Disney. So bambimedia.com.
I heard about that, yeah.
And you can also, I do a lot on YouTube. I'm growing our YouTube channel at the moment, having a fabulous time doing that. And a lot of the content is on the audio platforms as well. So however you want to get there, go for it. And YouTube and website is where to go.
Fantastic. Well, you have yourself a fantastic day and a good morning to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Chris.